Hi, this is Bill Cassidy. I'm senior editor at the Journal of Commerce, and I'm here today at the JOC Inland Distribution Conference with Jeff Tucker, who is CEO of Tucker Company Worldwide, the oldest family-owned brokerage and 3PL firm in the U.S. Jeff, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Bill. Great to be here. Thank you.
We just sat on a panel together that looked at trucking in the ELD era, and there were a lot of different and interesting perspectives that people shared with us. But your perspective on the driver issue, as I'll call it, the driver shortage to some, the difficulty in finding available drivers and hiring and keeping drivers. We've heard of driver shortages now for well over 100 years, actually. The first one that I've been able to track down was in 1914. There was an article in the Traffic World magazine about a shortage of drivers who were able to drive equipment, motor equipment, except for those who had been especially trained with horses. So, the availability of drivers, driver pay have been big issues for a long time. But this seems to be a crucial point in the driver story, you could say, in the U.S., in our history. We have more drivers than ever before, but we also have a driver shortage of what American Trucking Association's claims is 50,000 drivers this year. When you hear those numbers, how do you view that discrepancy, and what's the origin of that?
Well, Bill, I think that you hit the nail on the head when you talked about perspectives. So as a non-asset-based freight brokerage and 3PL, and as an owner of a company that also has data on motor carriers, I try really hard to look at data that exists in the marketplace and to be almost like an economist when I look at this data. So, for example, we hear of these numbers from the American Trucking Associations, and from their perspective, from the perspective of their members, and maybe you could extend that out to the largest truckload carriers and LTL carriers, they are in a driver shortage, a critical driver shortage. I think if you look at the next level of training drivers have, so for example, hazmat, flatbed, specialized superloads, the more training that's required, the more chronic the shortage is. But FMCSA data shows that since February of 2012, we've added over 551,000 truck drivers net to the for-hire fleet. So that to me is remarkable, and that dwarfs that number of the 50,000 short. And what's really important to note is more than 2-to-1 ratio, drivers have gone to the 1 to 100 truck fleets versus the 501 plus truck fleets, the largest carriers. So the largest carriers have added less than half of the number of drivers added to the 1 to 100 truck fleets. Huge shift going on there in the market.
And those large carriers, whether they're truckload carriers or even LTL carriers today, are the ones who we hear have the hardest time recruiting and keeping drivers. So you're seeing this big explosion of drivers entering the small carrier market. What's causing that diversion? Is it pay? Is it other issues?
There are so many issues that it's hard to nail them all down, but pay is one of them. But I would argue that the largest carriers have the most pay to offer. They have the most national accounts. What's driving these drivers away from the largest carriers are the opportunity to be your own boss. So there are tools like truckstop.com, DAT, and many, many other emerging tools that allow drivers to know what the market's paying. If I'm a driver and I can get an extra $100 or $200 extra a load because I know what the market's paying, that's a difference between failing in 6 months and profiting in 6 months. There's another thing that we're dealing with. This economy that we're in is a consumer-based economy. So we've got a lot of loads into retailers, and a lot of these retailers are, you could argue, abusive to the drivers, meaning they might keep drivers for 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours
which is an incredible amount of time. I mean,
Outrageous when you've got 2 hours free time.
Right.
And the shippers and receivers who are trying to be the best of the cream of the crop, they're getting turn-in drivers within an hour. That means a driver can go out and make more money. So if I can get out of the environment where my employer as a driver, my employer is forced to deal with these retailers on a regular basis, and the next load comes over, it's on the electronic device in my cab, and I've got to say, okay, here's another one of those loads. If I can get away from that, and an employer can tell me you'll never have to deliver into XYZ retailer again, that's a massive improvement in the driver's overall way of life.
right. And, one thing that I've heard, and we heard it today at the panel, is that large carriers claim there's a shortage of not just drivers, but of quality drivers. By that they mean they might get 1,000 applicants for driving positions and can hire maybe 20 of them because of either convictions in the past or accident records, insurance costs, drug offenses or drug testings that were positive. So, there are a lot of reasons that, these trucking companies have increased their qualifications, but it's also made it harder for trucking companies to find people. And I did wonder, if, the explosion of people we're seeing in the very small carrier area, is that in part because those smaller carriers may not have the same level of qualifications as, a large 1,000 truck, 10,000 truck company?
It's certainly possible. I would imagine that there's, whenever you put a population of, those kind of numbers together, 331,000 have entered the 1 to 100 truck fleets in the last 6 years. Clearly, there's got to be some, drivers in that pool. But again, I think there's a lot more going on there than meets the eye. One of the things that we've noticed about the business that's changed is, and it kind of goes against the grain of what we're seeing in a lot of technology and a lot of what gets a lot of coverage, is the trucking industry and service providers. The focus and the customization that we've got to provide to our customers is far greater than at any point in time. So to think that one carrier can just kind of come in and substitute out for another carrier, we've got processes. Carriers have customer-specific processes. We have customer-specific processes. So I think that what you're seeing, this growth, is carriers are doing interesting things, more interesting than they've done before, and the greater your ability to customize your service to your customer, the more satisfying the work is, and that translates right through to the driver, because the driver's an integral part of that.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much for being here today, participating in JOC Inland. Let's hope for a really interesting and a good 2019.
Thank you, Bill. Pleasure to be here.